I'm good. All right. Hello, my name's Eliza Kenyon, and today I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the research I've done this year in ISM. Let's start with about me. So I'm a senior, and I'm an ISM 2 student. Last year I studied international relations, and it was really fun, and I had a really good experience in ISM, which is why I decided to come back, and also because I decided that international relations is not the right career for me, so I wanted to try something different. And then I have a twin sister named Morgan. I play the euphonium in the Frisco High School band, and I really like to read and listen to music. So my topic of study this year is psychology, which is the science of mind and behavior. And the reason I'm interested in psychology, I told you guys in my last speech that I just saw something about psychology on Discovery Health a couple of years ago, like in middle school. And ever since then, I've just been really interested in different things that relate to mental health. And then when I was looking into careers that concern mental health, it was psychology or psychiatry, and a lot of people don't know the difference. The main difference is that psychiatrists are medical doctors that can prescribe medication, while psychologists just have a PhD. But I'm interested more in research, so I didn't think there'd be a point in going to medical school just so I could give people medication if that's not even what I want to do. So that's why I decided to do psychology over psychiatry, and those are some of the reasons for my interest in the field. Part of the ISM experience is conducting research over our topic through secondary sources such as articles and such. The first research thing we did was a career outlook, and I found some pretty promising stuff in the career outlook for a psychology job. Like educational requirements, as I said, you need a PhD. You can get a bachelor's, but then you'll probably be unemployed. And you can get a master's, but then you're also going to be probably unemployed. So you kind of have to get a PhD if you want to do anything with it, which is not that exciting because that's a lot of school. But I thought it'd be worth it if it was pretty interesting. And then the salary, it was okay. For all that school, you'd expect something a little bit better. But you're not going into the job for a salary, so it's all good. And it still looked like a pretty solid salary, like I'd be able to survive. So I thought that psychology looked pretty promising from the career outlook. And then neuropsychology is one of the fields I'm more interested in because it's big in research, and it also has to do with how the brain relates to your thoughts, brain connected to psychology. So it's like a mixture of neurology and psychology. So I thought that was interesting, and there's a lot of good research opportunities. A lot of the things they deal with are head injuries. In younger people, it's ADHD, and then in older people, dementia and stuff. And then another thing I did an assessment over, although it was kind of more of a primary thing, was the UNT visit. And I went to 2 psychology classes there that were really interesting. And the first one I went to was personality, and Annie went there with me, and it was really interesting. One thing not cool but interesting that he talked about was that even though we've had all this increases in technology, the levels of loneliness have gone up in the past 20 years, so people are more lonely even though we're more connected. And then another thing that I thought was interesting was he said that most people in the West, and especially in America, consider themselves above average in most things, which isn't how it works because you can't have a majority of people be above average. So in America, we have a lot of people have high self-esteem and a high sense of self-worth, which is really good usually, but it's also been leading to narcissism rising in the American population over the past few years. And then another class I went to after that was sexual behaviors, and that was really interesting, but I don't really feel comfortable talking about most of what they talked about in that class. But I thought I'd share one cool fact with you. So there's this thing that I probably can't pronounce correctly. It's called asphyxophilia, and that's when you really like suffocating yourself. So each year, 250 to 1,000 people die by hanging themselves accidentally because they have this disorder. And apparently, as he told us, it is just not a noble death because they come in and you're hanging and you're usually not clothed, so it's not a good situation. You don't want that in your obituary. So if you have that issue, get some help. But it was a really interesting class. There was a lot of interesting stories like that that he told us about. And then the next thing to talk about is my interview process. I've completed 5 interviews so far, and then I'm going to have 3 more in the next week. The first person I interviewed, though, was Dr. Lynette Silva, and she's an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at UT Southwestern, but she's really a psychologist. She just works in the Department of Psychiatry. But she does neuropsychology evaluations. So basically, people come in who are referred, and usually they're like referred by family members because it's mostly adults for her, and they're having memory issues, and so she has to test them for like dementia and Alzheimer's and that stuff. And the testing takes like hours, so it's very tiring, and the people who are there don't want to cooperate because they don't think there's anything wrong with their memory. They think that they're perfectly healthy, but usually they're not, and there's good reason for them to be there. So she just told me some interesting stories about that. How like one guy was just sitting there like halfway through his testing, he just pulled a tangerine out of his pocket and started eating it. So she had interesting stories like that. So I thought that was kind of interesting. The next person I interviewed was Dr. Ann Capel. She's the founder and CEO of Alpha Consulting and Empowerment, and she works in industrial organizational psychology, and I didn't even know that existed, so it was really interesting to hear about, especially since it's expected to grow like 53%, which is like way above average. So it's really important. Basically, she helps like different companies work with like different people, help them work together. Like a big issue that they're focusing on is the youngest generation that's just coming into the I don't know what the word for it is anymore. Okay, the youngest generation that's like coming into the offices, they like a different style of authority than they're used to, so she has to work with them and work with the CEOs so they can work together better. And so it was really interesting talking to her. Next person I interviewed on the same day, because I had 2 interviews in one day, was Dr. Ken Johnson, and he was really interesting. He's a professor at Amberton University, and he also works part-time in a private practice that works with sex offenders, but he's done like so many different jobs. He's worked in like probationary stuff. He's worked in family court, like child court. He's worked with divorce counseling, or as a divorce counselor. So he was really interesting because he's done a lot of different things. But right now he works with sex offenders, and I thought that was really interesting. He said actually that like out of the people he's worked with, he feels the safest with them because they have so much like hanging over their shoulders. Like most of them have families, so they don't want to go back to jail, and they know that they'll get in trouble really fast if they mess up. So he said that they're actually pretty safe people to work with, although he is an adult male. So the next person I met with was Dr. Shannon Taylor, and she is also a neuropsychologist, except for she works with kids instead of adults. So she does like a lot of ADHD testing, IQ testing, different emotional tests just to see where kids are at. She's also worked with people who have had head injuries, but she says that's really sad, so I don't think she likes doing that as much. But she was really interesting to talk with as well and hear about working with youth. She said that usually young people and their parents are much more cooperative than older people or people who are in trouble, of course, because they just want to get help. They want to get help. And she was also interesting because when I went to interview her, she had a rabbit just roaming around her office because they have a pet rabbit there. So that was kind of cool. The last person I interviewed was Dr. Michael Barnett, and he was the person whose class I attended at UNT. He's a lecturer in the psychology department there, and he was really interesting as well. He used to have a private practice, and he just stopped working at it this year because he wanted to focus more on research. He does research in a lot of different areas, but neuropsychology is one of them. So it was interesting because I got to talk to 3 people who did neuropsychology, 2 of them clinical side and 1 more on the research. But he said that a common thing in psychology, like in research, is that they often prove things that are common sense to be true. Like one of his studies that he got published this year was that when you're being honest in your comedy, it's usually funnier, and that's like a common sense thing that we all know. So that was interesting to hear about as well. And he's the last person I interviewed so far. I'm interviewing 2 people by telephone from UT Southwestern, one on Friday and one on Monday. Then I'm interviewing 1 person in Dallas next Wednesday, and then hopefully I'll be able to choose who I want to be my mentor after I've had 8 interviews. So I'm just going to end with my quote. It's by Ray Bradbury, and it's, "Insanity is relative. It depends on who has who locked in what cage." And I like this quote because not only does it deal with sanity, which goes great with psychology, but I also like it because it talks about perspective, and you have to like look at a situation from a different perspective, or maybe from like an outsider's perspective, so that you can get so you can see what's really happening, not just what you think is happening. And so I think that's just important to know, like not only in the field of psychology, but it's a good skill to have in life. And so thank you for coming. If you have any questions, please ask them.